Hi, grade fives. So today we're going to continue to talk about where the early French and British settled. We've looked at all the maritime provinces so far, except for Newfoundland. So we're going to focus on Newfoundland today. And we're also going to talk about some reasons why the French and the British left Europe and migrated to the Atlantic provinces. So here are some of the settlements we would have previously talked about. As we had discussed, between the early 1600s and the mid 1700s, people were trying to acquire land and resources. And by the 1700s, the British had gained control over a lot of French territories in most maritime provinces. Now, in Newfoundland, Newfoundland was a place that the British and the French were visiting quite a bit, even before the 1700s, because a lot of fishermen sailed over to Newfoundland in the summer to catch fish and then took that food to Europe in the fall. So they were using this land a lot just for the sake of fishing. By the 1800s, most people had actually went to Newfoundland and settled. People moved from cove to cove building settlements, first in Conception Bay and then in Trinity Bay and other places along the northeast coast. In the summer, settlers fished, and in winter, they trapped and they built boats. The fish and the furs that they harvested were sold in Europe. Settlers who came to Newfoundland tried to choose places to live where it was easier to utilize the land. So, for example, usually when people created settlements, they chose places such as coves that had sheltered harbors and beaches. This is because these places were good for drying cod and they were close to fishing grounds. All settlers faced challenges. For example, even though they had a lot of accessibility to the ocean, and this was great for fishing, the soil here was not good quality, and it made farming really difficult. The cool weather that came also resulted in them only having a short growing season to produce food. Much of the information archaeologists have gathered about the settlers comes from settlements. And as you can see, I've taken a picture of the map. This shows us the different settlements in Newfoundland at this time, most of them being English settlements, a few at the bottom of the province being French. So next we're going to look at how life changed for the British and the French once they migrated to the Atlantic provinces. So this is more of an overview of some of the reasons why the French and British would have came to all the Atlantic provinces and not necessarily just Newfoundland. So people migrated to the Atlantic provinces for several reasons. One of these being that land for farming in Europe was not good quality. And if the weather conditions were bad, the harvests were usually poor and there were little food for villagers. If farming families left their land to look for jobs in the city, they often ended up living in crowded, unsanitary conditions with no access to clean running water. For these reasons, some people left France and Britain looking for better lives and more opportunities in settlements in Atlantic Canada. Numerous settlers were originally also from fishing towns in England or France, and migratory fishers experienced the kinds of hardships that one settler described in a letter, which I will read. So one advantage was that they would continue to do a job that they had already previously done in Europe, just in a different place where food was more readily available. So here's the letter. It's written by John Harding, and he is a settler on the island of Newfoundland, and he's describing what's going on with the fishery. This is from his perspective. We soon found that we were not in old England enjoying the liberty we used to have. For we had to work from the dawn of the day to dark night about the fishery. This we did not like. I was not more than a fortnight in this place when I and 7 men more were sent in a cod skiff hauling codfish. We were sent off Sunday after dinner and not to return until Saturday evening. No place to sleep, only take a nap in the skiff, while one would be watching for a haul of fish, and only one meal cooked in 24 hours. We had only one night in the week to sleep in our bed. This continued 6 weeks, and in that time we hauled 600 pounds of codfish. Now, in some cases, the fishery was not always successful, and there is a particular example of this in Prince Edward Island. That's because the fishery had failed. But many settlers, even though the fishery had failed, had chose to remain because the land was good for farming. When people moved from Europe to farm, they had to work a lot harder to make the land farmable. And the reasons for this is that they had to clear the land. And not only that, but they did not have the help of their neighbors to help them get established. In this new home, they sometimes lived far apart from other people who could help them out with farming. In Europe, people lived in communities and they shared a common language and culture. However, here in the Atlantic provinces, settlers sometimes came into contact with people who had traditionally been their enemies, like the French. As we've seen in all of the maps that we've seen that in most of the places we now know as the Atlantic provinces, there were British and French settlements within the same parcel of land. So this is what that's referring to. So we've looked at the 4 Atlantic provinces and the different settlements of the French and the British in the early 16 and 1700s. We've talked about reasons why they would have settled in these places. And so what I'm going to ask you to do today is I'm going to ask you to work on what we call a T-chart. It's basically like a table. And you're going to compare the life of a person in the 1600s to that of a person today in the Atlantic provinces. I've also attached a video called A Settler's Life in Newfoundland. The example of this could probably apply to all the Atlantic provinces, but I think the video does a really good job of explaining in more detail some of the kind of both positive and negative things settlers would have experienced in the Atlantic provinces. So I've attached that for you to watch, and I will show you what that chart looks like, and I will explain what I would like you to do. So here's the chart, and you're going to compare like I said, you're going to compare the life of people in these Atlantic provinces in the early 16 and 1700s to people today. You can use the PowerPoint. I've attached it to the assignment. You can also use the YouTube video I left. It's only about 9 minutes. It's not very long. And I've left an example. So for example, people in the 16 and 1700s had no technology. People in Atlantic Canada today have technology. In these examples, you could talk about the fishery. You could talk about farming. You could talk about just different issues that they had between them because of culture and language. Do we see those issues now in Atlantic Canada? So those are some examples you could write for what we saw in the 1600s and 1700s compared to what we see in Atlantic Canada today. I'm expecting 6 examples. I have 5 to 6. If you really are struggling with that 6th, it's okay to just have 5, but try to have the chart filled if you can. And if you have any questions, you can always message me in the classroom. You can comment on the assignment. You can send a Gmail. And that is the assignment for today. And good luck. And we will be chatting soon. Bye.